Very happy to hit 6,000 subscribers. So thank you to all my dear subscribers all across the globe. Anyway, in this video, I'm going to be asking whether there's going to be an early election in 2022. It's a Westminster election for the United Kingdom. The last election was December 2019. It's only 2.5 years ago. Of course, the parliamentary term is 5 years. There used to be that Fixed Term Parliaments Act, which is to say that if there was to be an early election, that could only be if there was a 2/3 vote in the House of Commons. But that was repealed in March this year. Hello there, FJ Electoral. I'd never heard such a name. You got Ronald Reagan as your image. Anyway, so now we've reverted to the old system whereby it's just prime ministerial fiat controls it. The Prime Minister advises Her Britannic Majesty to dissolve Parliament. She always follows that advice. That triggers an election. There we go. Incidentally, the Queen may well die this year because the word is that she's got bone cancer and treatment has stopped because it's ineffectual. She doesn't particularly want to preserve her life. It's more painful and unpleasant than just accepting she's going to die imminently. I'm not absolutely certain that rumor is true, but that could obviously queer the pitch if she dies later this year. Even if she doesn't die, she might become incredibly frail, just not appear in public for weeks, maybe months. Anyway, so yeah, there have been persistent rumours out of Downing Street from special advisors, other sources in the Westminster Village, saying that this is going to happen. Now, Boris Johnson has just survived a leadership election. This is, the Conservatives are fairly unpopular. This is sort of mid-term, but they're not as unpopular as might expect, all things considered, with rampant inflation, with Partygate, and with public services going bad. 6 million people on the waiting list for the National Health Service. Admittedly, that's partly because of lockdown. They couldn't do anything for 2 years, and on, and nothing going particularly well in healthcare, education. Then there's this madcap plan signed off by Sir Tony Blair and Sir John Major to completely tear up secondary education, start all over again. I mean, the last thing education needs is more pointless reorganization. There's rising illegal immigration, and there's just lots of problems which are aggravating for the Conservative government. Astonishingly, the Tories are between 2% and 8% behind Labour in the polls. It was 20% about a month ago. So the Conservatives reckon it's only going to get worse. Now, the Conservatives, they're going for these cultural wedge issues. They're posing as a very anti-woke party. That'll appeal to some particularly working class voters who economically might be more sympathetic to Labour, saying it's the party of the working man. Labour, for all their flaws, they will improve the NHS. They care about ordinary people like us on low incomes and so on. Because if people would vote with their wallets, well, they wouldn't be happy with the current Conservative government. Moreover, this winter, the high fuel prices are really going to be agonising for people trying to heat their homes, trying to run a car and everything like that. This Ukraine conflict shows no sign of abating. The Northern Ireland Protocol Bill is partly the Conservatives posturing as tough and nationalistic, playing hardball with Brussels. Yeah, they're sending these asylum seekers to Rwanda for processing, if it ever transpires, would be proving that the United Kingdom has resumed control of its borders and is really discouraging illegal immigration. The national rail strike, I mean, that's more bad news, but Labour has really fumbled this one and come on the side of the strikers. This is going to inconvenience tens of millions of people, teenagers taking their GCSEs, people who want to go to music festivals, wanted to go to Wimbledon and whatever. Admittedly, rail strikes, that they don't palsy the country as much as they used to because, of course, so many people can work from home. We got used to doing it for 2 years. Anyway, so the Conservatives are going to see how these by-elections go. The Wakefield by-election and the Tiverton and Honiton by-election on the 23rd of June. So that's Thursday next. The Conservatives are almost certainly going to lose Wakefield and might lose Tiverton. But anyway, so it's throwing some red meat to the Tory base, trying to actuate people who didn't usually vote Conservative as well, but did vote in 2019, Brexiteer voters. So to win over more of those swing voters. Brenda from Bristol is that sort of demographic, as they say. So the date that Conservatives are looking at is Thursday, the 27th of October. But anyway, although Labour is slightly ahead, they think these people are not very committed to Labour. Labour always struggles with turnout. I remember Harold Wilson in his autobiography said, elections are decided by differential abstention. The trouble is that people who are Labour inclined who don't vote, too many of them, partly because Labour is heavily reliant on the votes of younger voters, and younger people have got the worst turnout. Conservative voters tend to be older, and are more likely to actually go and vote. So the Conservatives think that Boris Johnson might play a blinder, he might electrify the crowds, he'd work his magic, pressing the flesh. That could go either way. It's a high risk strategy. He's always a gambler. Sir Keir Starmer, though he's respectable, he's a bit wooden, he's bland, and he really doesn't energize people. There's also the thing is, of course, is if he is fined by the police, he said he and Angela Rayner will resign. They could, of course, stand for the leadership again. That might be seen as a cop-out, but Labour might get a more effective leader, where Streeting is feared by some Conservatives. Even Lisa Nandy, some people think that she would be a better leader for Labour. I don't see it myself. Anyway, the Conservatives would like to resolve this quite soon. Catch up on this later. Okay. So the Standards and Privileges Committee is investigating Boris Johnson and seeing where Boris Johnson lied to Parliament, well, which he did. Well, the question was asked was, sort of, can he confirm that there was a lockdown party or something? And he said no, as in no, he can't confirm it, or no, there was no lockdown party. So that seems like casuistry to me. If he didn't lie in Parliament, he most certainly lied outside Parliament. Anyway, there's a national COVID inquiry, which is going to start in September this year. Now, they won't report for a couple of months. COVID, when do we know about it? What processes were engaged in order to study, in order to determine policy, how sensible was the policy, how efficient it was administered, all that. And the Conservative Party doesn't think it's going to come well out of that one. So would rather have an election before the solids hit the fan with that. The Conservative Party might have another vote of confidence in Boris Johnson. Of course, they can't do so until June next year, but the Conservative Unionist Party might be able to rewrite its rules before that. There are boundary changes consequent upon the 2021 census, and the Tories reckon this will redound to their disadvantage. So the Conservative conference is October this year, and the Conservatives think that could really drum up more support before the election. But anyway, if Boris Johnson is somehow forced out and a new Conservative leader comes in, the Conservatives reckon, well, he'd have a honeymoon. He, or indeed she, should call an election immediately. They think that Gordon Brown made a catastrophic mistake not calling an election September 2007 when he was toying with the idea. He bottled it. Now, that's partly because the Labour Party was millions of pounds in debt. Labour Party would have gone bankrupt if they had called an election. Well, they could really held one on the cheap. And actually, Labour was several points ahead. And because they tarried, then they left it. 2008, the credit crunch, Conservatives went well ahead, and Labour never came anywhere close. But anyway, so yes, it is a perilous strategy. But I mean, Boris Johnson would either win convincingly, so he thinks, or the bricks would fall down around his ears. He doesn't really care about the long-term future of the party. So Labour is also anxious about this early election. Think a snap election might be dangerous for them. Imagine losing a fifth election on the trot. But anyway, but if they have a good result in Wakefield, I mean, it just depends how much they're going to win it by. That will buoy them up a little bit. If the Liberal Democrats take Tiverton and Honiton, that would look very bad for the Conservatives. But remember, Lib Dems, they often gain these seats in general elections. They very seldom retain them. Sorry, gain them in by-elections. They seldom retain them in Westminster elections. Anyway. So the Conservatives have got a lot far more money than Labour. So Labour hasn't propounded its own policies because there's some advantage in strategic ambiguity. Don't set out your stall too early, because that allows the governing party to critique it. Yeah, don't paint yourself onto a corner. Okay, it's very easy to criticise, but then when you set out your stall, well, it's easier for the governing party to analyse that, scrutinise that, and show its shortcomings, point out who it's going to hurt, or whatever the figures are. They'll say they don't add up. They say it's a Labour tax bombshell. Anyway, Labour hasn't obviously sorted out all its parliamentary candidates and seats it doesn't hold. Anyway, so it's shadow cabinet. They're beginning to think is a government in waiting. They have high confidence in Rachel Reeves, the shadow Chancellor Exchequer, a former officer of Oxford University Students' Union. Well, don't let that put you off. Anyway, so the Labour Party know that their policy on immigration is a bit risky. They're seen as too amenable to large-scale illegal immigration, which will put off some floating voters. It'd be very difficult to win outright. They need to win something like 100 seats to win outright. Sorry, more than 100 seats, actually, more like 126. And the coalition of chaos, what do they have a coalition with the SNP or something like a confidence and supply agreement? Would that be terrible? The Conservatives had they had a coalition with the Lib Dems. The Tories had Common Supply with the DUP. Somehow that was acceptable. And, you know, there are coalitions all the time in the Welsh government, in the Scots government, in the Northern Ireland Assembly, in loads of local councils. So why on earth in Westminster it has to have to be the end of the world? It's happened several times before, and it's worked rather well. So, I mean, Boris Johnson's on a trip to Kiev, and I don't think it's entirely disinterested, just out of his moral concern for the liberties of the Ukrainians. Is partly a welcome decoy from all his domestic travails. Anyway, Zelensky has voiced his vociferous support for Bojo. So Bojo can bang a nationalistic drum there, be a bit of a militarist. Anyway, it's not certain that this early election will go ahead, but the Tories reckon in 2023 the news is going to be dismal. Inflation will be really hurting people. Unemployment, well, won't rise that much. Obviously, shortages in the labour in the labour market. Things that they can use against Labour. The Conservatives say, well, there are whisperings in Labour. Would they try and rejoin the European Union? I think Labour wouldn't put that front and centre of their campaign because I think that would be disastrous like 2019. They might let the Lib Dems do that. There seems to be some sort of backroom deal between Labour and Lib Dems not to fight each other too hard. Would they even agree not to contest certain seats? You look at Labour with about 200 seats, the Lib Dems with about, well, not quite 20. So 650 seats, exclude the Northern Ireland ones, that's 630. So how many Tory-held seats are there? So there are about 360. And see, of those, in which of those 360 is Labour closest to defeating the Tories, in which is the Lib Dems closest to defeating the Tories, and divvy those up. And Labour would stand where they're best placed to beat the Tories, and the Lib Dems would stand where they're best placed to beat the Tories, and the other party would not field a candidate. Now, they might not do that, might seem too much of a stitch up, too cynical. Possibly they could field candidates, but make no effort, just a paper candidate, because they're beginning to forgive each other for that Lib Dem coalition with the Conservatives in 2010, and they've just got to get the Tories out. They cannot abide the thought of a fifth Conservative consecutive victory. Remember, in the mid-90s, the equivalent situation, when the Conservatives won 4 elections in a row, the Conservatives were far behind Labour in the polls, but the Conservatives are not far behind now. Admittedly, the Conservatives have been in office for, say, 12 years, not 18 years. Anyway, so again, Johnson is still rated higher than Starmer as a prime minister when you ask the public, which is quite disturbing for Labour. So he's sort of distressingly reminiscent, if not of Corbyn, of maybe of the guy before him, Miliband. Anyway, so this levelling up, Johnson's going to improve infrastructure in Northern England. Well, very little of that has come to pass. So he's just not delivered on public services reforms. Very little benefit's been felt from Brexit. So trying to call an election before people start saying, come on, you know, coronavirus is over, that excuse is weary. What are you doing? You just haven't delivered. Anyway, so I think it unlikely, not incredibly unlikely that the election will be held this year. I give it a 40% chance that it'll happen this year. I think people might be hacked off as well about another early election. There were 2 early elections in recent years, 2017, 2019. Anyway, so there's probably going to be a recession in 2023, and the Tories really wouldn't like that. They'll have that before there's a winter of discontent, as it were. And the NHS is groaning, and they know it's going to get an awful lot worse. So before there's too much public fury about that, hold an election. Okay, thanks for watching. Bye.